Hello, good morning, and thank you for watching our video. Today we are going to talk a little bit about stone tools and human behavior. So, more than 3 million years ago, some bipedal hominins with chimp-sized brains and hands that were already similar to ours made one of the most breakthroughs on human history, which was inventing stone tools. Stone tools result from an action that is beating on a block of rock with another rock or another hard material, and by doing so, break the first one in such a way that a piece of rock, which we usually call flake, and which has one or two sharp edges, is detached. Now, with this on their hands, with these cutting edges in their hands, hominins were now able to get nutrients and food that was until now unreachable, such as pieces of meat that were still attached to the bones of animals killed by large carnivores. Such invention may have been accidental. This alter and the exact moment when occurred will be most probably forever unknown, unless, of course, we invent a time machine. But the aha moment when he or she figure out how to do this systematically and what it could be done with it was, of course, unprecedented. Such invention and its potential were of such magnitude that must have been immediately understood by the rest of the members of the community, who began mimicking the action and duplicating the flake production. After that, nothing was the same again. And I'm absolutely sure that if that moment never happened, we would not be here today, and nothing that we have around us will ever exist. Now, one of the things that hominins must have noted right away during the trial and error process of using rocks and mapping rocks was that not all of them available on the landscape provided the cutting edges they needed. On the other hand, there were some that were great and others that were, more or less good. So ranking these rocks and spot them among all the others in the ground when they were covered by dirt and under the grass became a fundamental ability, because that was now a behavior that was going to make all the difference between survival or perishing. When we do archaeology, we can know which raw material was selected and used, because they will be those that appear in the archaeological sites. And in some high preserved sites, we can also know that artifacts were used for cutting and what artifacts were used for scraping, and also if they cut or scraped hard materials such as bone or soft materials such as meat or hide, because these actions in these materials with these stone tools leave a distinctive mark in the edges. So until now, we are talking about evidence that are clear to us. So it's there. You may need a microscope, but the information is there. But things become tricky as we zoom in details and try to reach other aspects that are implicit but immaterial, such as cognition. For instance, the process of stone tool production and use is based on, of course, cognition. Some animals, we know some animals use stone tools, not many, just some, and also primates. Among the primates, there are only some that use stone tools. But what we do, and what we are able to do, is much more complex than any other animal ever done or does. And even the process of mapping is something that only hominins did and humans do. So there is a cognitive ability that is higher in this case of hominins, and it was that cognition ability that made all the difference. By looking at the archaeological record, we can understand that the cognitive ability grow across time because artifacts become more exquisite, specialized, and complex. Fire began to be used, cabins, camps, and structures were set and built. And if we head to this paleoanthropological data, we know that brain grow and the hyoid bone, which is linked with the ability to speak, also appeared. And then you can also have the DNA studies that tell us that language and other capacities appeared at some point and become refined across time. So it seems that brain, tools, and language increased in complexity closer to each other, and leaving the impression that evolution of these three elements were deeply interlinked, which makes sense since humans are social animals, and communication and the development of tools and process, it's a very important tool that we have to survive and to develop our skills and our ability to adapt to surroundings. And when on the archaeological record, when we approach the stone tools, we have the privilege of being working with the most abundant evidence of human behavior, and we can raise some questions in order to try reaching further on human cognition. For instance, if a site has only one raw material, what does that mean? Does it mean that such raw material is the only one present on the landscape, or is the only one suitable to work with in the landscape? Or is there any cultural trait, like a tradition or a taboo or other phenomena of such nature, that pushed people to use that and none of the others? Well, if the landscape has only that one raw material, then the parsimonial explanation will be the first. But if the landscape has more, we need to investigate further. In the landscapes where I've been working, what is usually to see is a consistent combination of three raw materials: quartzite, quartz, and flint. Flint is a fine-grained raw material, usually homogeneous, that produces razor-sharp cutting edges. And because it's homogeneous, it allows us to predict with great confidence the shape and size of the flakes that we are extracting from the cobbles. On the other hand, quartz, that is also fine-grained and also produces razor-sharp cutting edges, it's very brittle. And that means that every time that we strike with a rock with another to take a flake, there is a large amount of debris that is produced, and usually flakes don't come up with the size and the quality and the shapes that we want. And usually they tend to be very small when they are good. And finally, we have quartzite, which is usually homogeneous, with allowing to predict with great confidence the shape and size of the flakes. It's very, very hard, but it's coarse grained. That means that it doesn't produce razor-sharp cutting edges as the quartz and flint. So the question I'm pursuing in the last years are, in landscapes where these three raw materials are available and fine-grained ones such as flint seem to be the best, why are there the other two present in the archaeological site? Again, the other question would be, if hunter-gatherers traveled dozens of kilometers across different landscapes, why sometimes did they carry the best raw materials to the base camps, and in other moments they seem to not have done it? To reach the answer to these questions, I have three lines of approaches. One is a very thorough excavation of the archaeological sites, complemented with a very detailed analysis of the assemblage to figure out the reliability of the context, the ages, functionality, and other specificities. Other approach is to systematically collect raw materials across the landscape, not only the landscape where the site is, but also the landscape on the territories that are adjacent to that, and compare them through geochemical and other analysis with those that we see in the assemblages from the archaeological site. And by doing this, we can figure out where those rocks came from. And finally, the third approach is performing experimental archaeology. And I do this both mechanical and manual. The mechanical experiments allows us to understand physics, namely how friction works between specific materials. For instance, flint on wood or bone or hide, quartzite on wood, bone or hide, quartz on wood, bone or hide, and so on. So with this, we understand for what purposes each one of these raw materials is more or less suitable. But I also like to do manual experiments because by doing that, it allows us to understand how much the artisan skills potentiate that ability. And we know that the individual ability was, and it still is today, one of the major driven forces of the evolution of process, and it has a great impact on the results of human action, and that's one of the actions and one of the things that makes things go further. Therefore, mechanical and manual experiments are complementary between them, but the experiments must be always designed towards specific hypotheses and possible to be tested by these means. Of course, to this, we should also add the blind test, that is basically to see if we can find something that we are not thinking before that. When the overall characteristics of the site, the shape of the artifacts and the marks present on the edges are put together with the results from experimental archaeology and also with the chronological, geoarchaeological, and paleoenvironmental and paleoanthropological data, and all this is congruent and all this makes sense, then we are very confident in our interpretation about answering questions related with what, where, when, how, who, and why that specific archaeological context occur. With that, we can propose then theories, ideas, hypotheses, and models, and also to propose thresholds in which are expected to see things change in the archaeological record in periods of time or in regions for where the human present is still not known or for which we still have very few information. These changes on behavior that we expect to see or we see in the archaeological record may include, for instance, the intensification of exploitation of local resources, the need of extent of territory of exploitation, to change the shape and size of the artifacts, to change the raw materials in which they were made, or a combination of slight shifts in all or just some of these features, or even of others that I did not put here. So, wrapping up this presentation, what I want to say is that despite archaeological and paleoanthropological investigation already have almost 200 years, we are just only scratching the surface. Many of the approaches that I briefly talked today here were only recently developed and are still being refined. Some of them occur in haha moments of the researchers. For instance, I can talk by my experience. The prototype that you just saw, it came up to me when I was completely stalled on my ideas, and I was sitting on my sofa watching the TV show Mythbusters. However, I had to ask my brother-in-law to build it. I only had the idea, but I have to ask him to build the prototype because he's an engineer, and so he was the artisan that was able to put it together. So what I mean is, if you have an idea at some point that was murmuring in the back of your head, if you have some point in your life you had an haha moment, but you thought that it was a long shot or just a stupid idea, what I want to say is that probably you should go back and think about that idea again, because maybe you were right. Maybe you are close to a breakthrough. We know that most of the breakthroughs were saw by other people in the beginning as stupid ideas or just things that will not work. And these were the ideas that made all the difference. So take a look to what we have been doing in the last years. And if you see that we can help you in some way, just email us and let us see if your idea can lead us somewhere. Let's make great things happen. Thank you very much.